Tonight, will the Supreme Court's decision on gay marriage impact the freedoms of religious believers? The chairman of the USCCB's Ad Hoc Committee on Religious Freedom, Archbishop William Lori, will tell us. And later, they're part of a New Orleans musical dynasty. The last Southern gentlemen, father and son ELLIS and DELFEAYO MARSALIS, are here to talk about family, faith, and jazz. And finally, the former White House Chief of Staff under George H.W. Bush remembers his boss and what he could teach those in power today. Governor John SUNUNU is here. The World Over Live begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Archbishop William Lori, Dr. Matthew Frank, ELLIS and DELFEAYO MARSALIS, and John SUNUNU are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, or if you have a question, I'll be live tweeting throughout on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo, or you can email me at worldover@EWTN.com. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. The United States Supreme Court has again sided with the Obama administration on the Affordable Care Act. In a 6-3 ruling, the justices decided that those who get health insurance through federal exchanges will be eligible for subsidies, even though the 2010 law only stipulates subsidies for those insured through state exchanges. The justices got around that, ruling that the language was ambiguous, but Congress intended to improve health insurance markets, not destroy them. Since 34 states chose not to set up exchanges, 8.7 million people get their insurance through federal exchanges. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion and was joined by Justice Anthony Kennedy and 4 of the liberal members of the court. In a blistering dissent, Justice Antonin Scalia called the court's decision quite absurd, and the court's 21 pages of explanation make it no less so. This decision will surely be remembered, he said, as evidence that the court does whatever it takes to uphold and assists its favorites. He suggested that the law should now be called SCOTUS Care. This is a big win for the president. And the Republican Congress gave President Obama another victory this week. On Wednesday, the Senate approved a 6-year renewal of trade promotion or fast-track authority. The measure restricts Congress to a mere up or down vote on trade deals negotiated by the president. Obama and supporters in Congress said the president needed the fast-track authority to finalize the 12-nation Trans-Pacific Partnership deal, which encompasses more than 60% of the world's economic production. The Senate approved the bill 60-38. Democrats overwhelmingly voted against it, as did 5 Republicans. And the Supreme Court of Mexico got out in front of their U.S. counterparts in a same-sex marriage ruling this past week. The Mexican High Court ruled that state laws which define marriage as the union of a man and a woman are discriminatory and unconstitutional. The court said in its decision that since the purpose of marriage is not procreation, there is no justification for restricting marriage to heterosexuals. The bishops of Mexico said that the court got it wrong. They noted that the family is founded on the marriage between a man and a woman who can procreate and therefore guarantee the survival of society. Mexico is 80% Roman Catholic. Meanwhile, in Rome, hundreds of thousands, perhaps as many as 1 million people, gathered in defense of traditional marriage. Organizers aim to support a child's right to a mother and father, and they oppose what they call gender ideology education and early childhood sex education. Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi and the country's left-leaning government are pushing for the approval of same-sex civil unions by July. In the Middle East, more Islamic State atrocities. To mark the Islamic holy month of Ramadan, ISIS in Syria is offering female sex slaves as top prizes for a Quran memorization contest. Memorizing the Quran is a common practice of piety for Muslims, and 2 boys have reportedly been crucified by ISIS for not fasting during Ramadan. According to the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, the boys' bodies were on display with placards hung around their necks announcing their crime. Meanwhile, the ISIS propaganda website posted videos of their latest executions. 5 people were drowned in cages. 4 others were locked in a car that was then hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. 6 others were decapitated after explosives tied to their necks were detonated. And according to the latest United Nations figures, more than 3 million Iraqis have been displaced due to the terror wrought by ISIS. The majority of refugees are from the Anbar province, captured by ISIS last summer. Despite U.S. coalition airstrikes that are aimed at returning the territory to the Iraqi government, Anbar remains under ISIS control. And the table is set for the upcoming Synod on the Family. The blueprint for the Synod was released this week, outlining the topics to be addressed. Cardinal Walter Casper's controversial proposal to admit divorced and remarried Catholics to Holy Communion after a penitential process is in the document. The working document notes that some Synod fathers during last year's meeting in Rome maintained that divorced and remarried persons, or those living together, can have fruitful recourse to a spiritual communion. Others raised the question as to why, then, they cannot have access to sacramental communion. Also up for discussion, how to welcome and respect gays in the Church, as well as pastoral care for them and their families. There is no mention in the document of ministering to those in homosexual unions. Italian media are reporting that the Vatican's top doctrinal body has ruled that there is no evidence of supernatural activity surrounding the purported Marian apparitions at Medjugorje. According to multiple reports, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith affirmed the findings of a special papal commission this week. That commission cast doubt on the Medjugorje phenomenon, which began in 1981. From that time on, 6 visionaries have claimed that the Virgin Mary appeared to them and that she continues to do so. The CDF decision will reportedly be passed on to Pope Francis, who will render a final judgment. The CDF is recommending that pilgrimages to Medjugorje not be forbidden, provided that they do not center on the alleged apparitions. We'll continue to follow this story. And some sad news. Sister Nirmala, Mother Teresa's successor at the Missionaries of Charity, passed away this week after a long struggle with heart disease. She was 81 years old. Sister Nirmala was a Catholic convert from Hinduism. She joined the Missionaries of Charity at 17. She developed a close relationship with Mother Teresa, who encouraged her to study law and open new houses in Panama, New York, and Kathmandu. Sister Nirmala succeeded Blessed Mother Teresa as head of the order upon her death in 1997. May Sister Nirmala rest in peace. And finally, some good news. I've been wanting to share this with you for weeks. Today is the official cover release for my new book for young readers and the young at heart. Will Wilder, The Relic of Perilous Falls. It is the story of the aforementioned Will Wilder, a mischievous, headstrong 12-year-old with an otherworldly gift who borrows a powerful relic for his own purposes and accidentally unleashes an ancient evil. You'll have to read the rest. I'm just crazy about Jeff Nentrup's incredible cover, and here it is. It captures the spirit and wonder of the first book in this fun and occasionally frightening series. It'll be published by Random House Kids in March of 2016. You can pre-order it now at Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, and the EWTN Religious Catalog. And I want to give you a chance to win an advance copy. If you go to my Twitter or Facebook accounts and repost or retweet the image of the book cover to your friends, you'll instantly be registered to win one of 10 preview copies that I'm giving away. Now make sure you retweet or include Raymond Arroyo or at Raymond Arroyo in your tweet so I know what you did. On July 9th, I'll announce the 10 winners selected at random and send them a signed edition. It is the perfect read for all adventurers 8 to 80. Can't wait for you all to read the whole book. And if you'd like me to come speak to your group or school or parish or library, drop me a line at raymond@raymondarroyo.com. Put book in the subject line and give me the contact info. I'll try to work your visit into my March book tour. When we return, Archbishop William Lori and Matthew Frank join me to discuss the implications of the Supreme Court's gay marriage ruling on religious liberty. The World Over continues in a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. With the Supreme Court's landmark decision legalizing gay marriage in the United States, how might religious believers be impacted? Or will they? Here to discuss is Archbishop William Lori of Baltimore, chairman of the U.S. Bishops Ad Hoc Committee on Religious Liberty. He joins us from Baltimore. Archbishop, thanks for being with us.
Nice to be with you, Raymond.
Now, this is the law of the land, gay marriages now. Where do you go from here, and how do you operate in this landscape?
It seems to me that the first challenge is to teach, and to reach our people, to explain what marriage authentically is in the eyes of God, the eyes of the church, and why it is important to express our concern for children and their need for a male and a female role model growing up, and to understand the complementarity of the sexes. So the first thing is evangelization. The second thing, I think, is to simply look at the new legal landscape and to see what maneuvering room there is. I think we have to adopt the attitude of Thomas More. St. Thomas More did not rush to the gallows. He advanced cleverly, I might add, every defense that he could before he was martyred. And I think we have to look at every possibility that might exist so that we might at least carve out for church ministries the freedom to bear witness, the freedom to be able to do them according to our own lights, to hire for mission, to give benefits in accord with our teaching, and to be able to promote authentic marriages between one man and one woman in a way that is unfettered by the state and is not considered to be hate speech.
Archbishop, what do you fear most about this ruling? Before the Supreme Court weighed in, you said this raises enormous freedom of religion issues, such as?
Well, for one thing, one worry is how or what basis it might be decided upon. If, for example, it were to be decided that those who hold for marriages between one man and one woman do so with no rational basis, but instead have a bias or an animus against persons of a homosexual inclination, well, obviously that sets the church's teaching up as being bigoted, as being an instance of unjust discrimination, and certainly that's not the side of the law we want to be on. But even if it's decided on some other basis, I can imagine that it will affect our ability to hire for mission. For example, to be able to hire in various types of church ministries those who follow the church's teaching and their lifestyle and in what they personally believe and profess. It will also affect things like the kinds of benefits we give to employees.
Any concern that this could impair the tax status of the church, the tax-free status?
I'm glad you brought it up, because when this was argued before the Supreme Court, Justice Alito said to the Solicitor General, to Verrilli, he raised the whole issue about the tax exempt status of church ministries and nonprofits. And the Solicitor General gave us no comfort. He didn't say, no, that's not an issue. He said, that's an issue. That's a question. So, of course, there's a lot to be worried about here and to pray for.
What does this gay marriage ruling mean to the Church's understanding of marriage, and what challenge does it present to the Catholic Church?
Well, it would not alter the Church's understanding of marriage. Not even the High Court can redefine marriage any more than the High Court could say that a child in the womb is not a child. Marriage is God's gift. Marriage between a man and a woman is what it is. And so I think we would have before us, as we already do, an enormous challenge in the area of evangelization, evangelizing about family life and marriage, what it really is. But secondly, we would now do so in an atmosphere that would be, I would have to say, legally extremely difficult.
I want to shift gears for a moment. This is the 4th annual Fortnight for Freedom. You just inaugurated it the other day. Tell me what is different about this year's Fortnight for Freedom, and what are you calling on the public to do?
What's different about this year's Fortnight for Freedom is certainly the theme, which is the freedom to bear witness. It's very apropos of our discussion right now. It's the ability of the Church in her ministries right now to be able to bear witness to all that the Church believes and teaches, not only in how we worship, but also in how we run our ministries and how we hire for mission. The other thing, however, we've done this year is to link domestic challenges to religious freedom with the overt persecution that's going on all around the world. In a way, we're kind of looking to the martyrs across the world who are losing their lives for their Christianity, and we're saying, you know, they're teaching us about religious freedom. They're teaching us that we should cherish and love religious freedom and not let it slip through our fingers. It's a very powerful theme, I would think.
In your homily, you said you called on people to allow Christ to awaken our faith and stir us to action. How so?
Well, first of all, it seems to me that religious freedom is under such challenge because so many people are no longer practicing their faith, their connection to not only the Catholic Church but other churches is much looser. If 30, 40, 50% of Catholics went to church every Sunday, we wouldn't be having these challenges. So the first challenge always is evangelization. But secondly, those who have a strong, active, vibrant faith, I think we should recognize that we have an obligation to be informed about the issues, and they are many. And then we should, as good citizens and believers, be out there speaking to our elected representatives and our appointed officials. If our voice isn't heard, this will keep going the wrong way.
Thank you, Archbishop Lori, for taking the time to join us. The Fortnight for Freedom is currently underway. It ends on July 4th. When we return, they're members of New Orleans musical royalty, ELLIS and DELFEAYO MARSALIS, on faith, family, and jazz. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. He is a Grammy-winning producer, composer, and trombonist. DELFEAYO MARSALIS is also a member of the Marsalis family of New Orleans. They're the first family to be designated as jazz masters by the National Endowment for the Arts. Delfeayo's latest effort is a labor of love with his father, Ellis, the patriarch of the family. Ellis was a longtime jazz instructor at the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts, or NOCA, a high school for the performing arts where he shaped a generation of incredible musicians. Now he and his son have come together for the first time on a CD called The Last Southern Gentleman, and they may well be. We caught up with Delfeayo Marsalis in New Orleans and D.C. to talk about his music and the legacy of which he is a part. People who don't live in New Orleans don't realize, well, maybe they do a little bit now, but the Marsalis family is to music what the Brennans are to food here in New Orleans, or what the Nevilles are to funk. I mean, jazz is really this family's domain. What was it like growing up surrounded by not only a father, who is the oracle, I call him, having gone to NOCA here, but he's continuing to perform, and of course your brothers.
It didn't seem like that when we were growing up. You know, we just knew that my dad played music, and when we'd go to his shows, like at Lou and Charlie's, there wouldn't be a lot of people there. And we were just like, why is Dad even here? You know, it's like, it's midnight, man. What are we, you know, what is he doing up here? There's like 10 people in the audience. And
he was there.
And he was there. He was there, and he was fully committed. And I think that level of commitment was what was really important to us. And
are there any memories that you have of watching your father at a young age as a musician and saying, I want to do that, either in performance or at home?
No.
No? No. Just the opposite, probably, because he was so dedicated to this. As all we parents who are immersed in creative projects, it makes it tough on the rest of the family sometimes.
Well, you know, we were just like a Southern Negro family. You know what I'm saying? Growing up in the 60s, we had other things that we were dealing with. You know, Branford and Winton, they were the first individuals to not be bused into an integrated school.
Right.
My mother chose to, you know, send them to an integrated school. So there were difficulties there. And you know,
that was a parochial school. That was Our
Lady of Perpetual
Help out in Kenner.
Yeah, and it was a different kind of a situation.
I'll bet.
And so I'm saying those types of things, not to belabor it, like, oh, we had such a tough life. It wasn't so much that, but you know, music was just part of what we did. And I started playing a little later on. You know, I started playing around 6th grade. Branford and Winton started playing earlier than that. We were in the Boy Scouts. We played all the sports, and at some point we started playing music. You know, my mother was very much into education and making sure that we never missed a day of school.
Tell me about how your faith has shaped this work, your work, both in the community and your music. Has it? I mean, the title of your first album always struck me, Pontius Pilate's Decision. There is a religious, spiritual character, I would say, to your work, to Winton's work as well. Do you see that?
Yeah, well, we grew up Catholic. My mother was very insistent every Sunday. And the thing that stuck out most to me was not the ritualistic aspect of the Catholic Church, but the stories and the great meaning of the stories in the Bible. So I would always look forward to the gospel and what are these stories? And when I recorded Pontius Pilate's Decision, I noticed that there were a lot of similar things going on. And the Bible, to me, has a number of stories that not only tell you about humans' frailty and failings, but also that which we know is correct. And my belief is children know. From a young age, we know right and wrong. It's just a question of what decisions we choose to make.
You produced for everybody from your brothers to Harry Connick. I mean, an array of artists, really incredible people. So that production hat is one that you continue to wear. Tell me about the other, the thing you're most known for now as a trombone player. Where did the trombone come from?
Well, you know, we always say we're perfectly suited, our personalities are, for the instruments we chose. In the jazz band, the trumpet plays the melody. So the trumpet has to have no regard for anyone else. Boy, Winton is right on par with that. He can play that melody and just... Now, the saxophone has an interesting job because the saxophone has to both contradict and argue with the trumpet. Imagine that.
Oh,
and also play things that are complementary.
We're learning all kinds of things
Now,
about
when
the Marsalis boys.
when the trombone comes in, the trombone is like, hey, maybe everything is going to be cool. Right? For you, those trombone players are really laid back and cool. Yeah. There's a reason why the trombones are in the middle of the jazz band. Not only to keep the trumpets away from the saxophones, and I think that my personality is suited for not only producing, but for the trombone, for that kind of role playing.
All the Marsalis boys, or as you call them, the Marsali, all of you are classically trained. I mean, you really studied music. And I'm sure this was Ellis's great insistence, because even when he taught at NOCA, a lot of these people, a lot of jazz musicians, they pick it up. Ellis was very attentive to the theory.
Right.
I'm sure he stressed that with you?
Well, yeah, but the really great musicians, Louis Armstrong, Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, these guys, Jelly Roll Martin, were studying from the classical, from the European tradition. And the European history is, a couple of thousand years. It's more than what we have here, in the American tradition. So we think that it's very important to cover as much ground as you can.
Well, I loved seeing you the other night at a little bar, DBA bar, in the French Quarter. You just got up on the stand with the Treme Band. Why do you do that? You're a name act. You travel the country. I know people in other countries who pay to see you. Suddenly, here you are popping up as an adjunct member of this band for a set. Why?
Well, you have to understand not only where the music came from, but you have to be able to adapt in any situation. Versatility is very important. And I really try to encourage the guys in the brass band community to come sit in with us. In fact, we had a young man, in fact, I might try to get him, he's related to Trombone Shorty, and he came last week and sat in, we put a whooping on him. And it's like, that's what you need. You need the youngsters to come out. I told him straight up, man, we're gonna give you the test the old school way.
I love it.
We're not gonna sit here and just tell you how great you sound.
Delfeayo's mentorship of the young also extends to the New Orleans school system. He oversees a summer music theater program for which he composes original pieces. They capture the lives of great African Americans with a young cast of black and white students. You've got black history here, but then you acknowledge, and it's writ large in this piece I just saw, we love America.
Right.
I also liked when I looked to my right and left, I had a black parent next to me, I had a white grandma to the right of me, and everybody was jamming along and having a great time.
Right.
It achieved its end, it seems to me, just from the audience around me. Forget the kids.
Well, that's the great thing about the South, and a lot of people don't understand the dynamic of the South who aren't from here. And with the new CD I have, The Last Southern Gentleman, part of the liner notes, I'm describing that. When folks landed on the plantation, right, irrespective of how they wound up there, it was one big family. And the thing that folks in the North don't understand is that it's like if you have this family and you got an uncle and he's doing stuff he shouldn't be doing, and then you got a cousin and the cousin is really good. You have all these dynamics, and that really is what makes the South unique. That's why jazz came from New Orleans, because you had all these people in this one place and they had to figure out how to get along, how to make it work. And that's what we try to do always, get as many people together and say, we've got to make this thing happen.
Delfeayo has made it happen touring with everyone from Ray Charles to Art Blakey. But these days, he's traveling with another legend, his father, the renowned pianist and educator, ELLIS Marsalis. Their first ever collaboration is a CD and tour called The Last Southern Gentleman. What is it like, Delfeayo, for you to travel and do gig after gig all over the country with your dad?
Well, it's different on a number of levels. My dad knows exactly what he's doing. He's got that really relaxed touch and that sound, and that's really helpful. you know, and it reminds me of when I played with the great Elvin Jones and the type of direction. You know, we have different specialties, I would say. So I prefer, you know, more of my originals, and the standards, he's just tearing those up. He's old school in me, you know, so it's like if I'm not on top of it, he's just gonna take it over.
Ellis, what is the secret? I mean, you have mentored and shaped now a good generation, maybe two, of jazz musicians known the world over, from Terence Blanchard to Harry Connick to your own sons. What is the secret, if there is a secret, to training a master musician, a musician that can really stand out?
Well, I don't know that it's fair to put that totally on me with the training. When I was teaching at NOCA, all of the students, with the exception of the drummers, was studying privately with somebody. But for the most part, the whole concept is not so much a secret, but a respect for excellence.
And it's, you believe in drilling the essentials, do your scales, you work the notes, you work the intervals, but then you like the idea of embedding a young artist among older artists and playing with a group.
Playing with a group, yeah. It's not always easy to get the young and old together.
Delfeayo, you have really caught this bug, as have Winton, this notion of passing along what you have to a younger generation. And what I love about your group at Snug Harbor is it is a gumbo of young performers and veterans who played for decades. What does that interplay give the younger performers and the older?
Well, I think the challenge for older musicians when they play together collectively is to maintain that fire, which the youngsters have.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes the older groups, they're kind of settled, and but they have that relaxation. So it's a great balance, I find, in everything. And you know, I find in tennis now, you see that the older generation, now they're teaching the young guys, because it's just that knowledge, that years of experience, you can't replace that. So to have everybody together, I think is the best thing.
Are you the last Southern gentleman of jazz?
Well, it's not us, but it's the idea that the integral elements or the crucial components in jazz had to do with good manners and a sense of humanity. And today, that's being expunged from the music, and it's only about what scales you're playing, how many songs do you know, how complicated can you make the music. But we find guys like Louis Armstrong and King Oliver, Kid Ory, and you read these great stories about how they were part of the community, and they were gentlemen. Yeah. And this is what we want to bring back to the younger generation, say.
The Last Southern Gentleman is available at Amazon and iTunes, as is Delfeayo's children's book, No Cell Phone Day. We want to thank the Bethesda Jazz Club and the folks at Snug Harbor in New Orleans for welcoming us. And finally, my last guest this evening is the former governor of New Hampshire and the former White House Chief of Staff under George H.W. Bush. With all the media attention around the Bush family given Jeb Bush's entry into the 2016 GOP presidential race, tonight we focus on the patriarch. I sat down with John SUNUNU recently here in our D.C. studio to talk about the new papal encyclical, presidential politics, and his new memoir about his White House years called The Quiet Man. the indispensable presidency of George H.W. Bush. Here's my interview with John SUNUNU. Governor SUNUNU, first of all, thanks for being here.
You're nice to have me on. Thank you.
I was surprised reading this book that you have a Palestinian background, and you're part Orthodox, part Catholic. How did this come to be? Tell people that little bit of your biography.
My grandfather came to Boston in 1904, and was part of the Greek Orthodox community there. My father was born in Boston, and that's the story.
But born in Havana?
Well, my dad was in the import-export business, and he and my mother went down there while he was doing a project, and you always get born where your mother is, you know.
It happens like that sometimes, doesn't it?
Right.
Let's talk for a moment. Why did it take you 20 years to write this book, The Quiet Man, which is really your memoir and a reflection on the career and the contributions of George H.W. Bush?
Well, it's not really a memoir. It's about 3.5 years, 4 years worth of what the president did. But I had promised the president I wasn't going to write one of those who's kissing who and who's kicking whom in the White House books. But about 1.5 years ago, I went up to see him in Kennebunk, and I said, you know, I'm going to break my promise. And he looked at me, and I said, you know, I believe I need to write a book putting everything you accomplished between a pair of covers so that the people will understand how significant what you did was. And he and Barbara Bush both said, go to it.
Why now? Why do it now? I mean, you could have done this 20 years ago.
Well, I don't think he would have been understood as well. A lot of what he did, you know, people are beginning to appreciate him more, and a lot of what he did had to show that it stood the test of time. And so the credibility, the timing really is taking advantage of the credibility that comes with time.
There's a comment in the book. You say, after FDR and LBJ, Bush's domestic legislation is the most prolific, consequential, and precedent-setting of all the modern presidents.
It is.
Why?
It is. He passed a budget bill that put budgeting rules back in the game and created the surpluses and the growth of the 90s. He took the logjam, 13-year logjam on clean air, and passed that legislation based on free market and market principles rather than just command and control, so that we reduced emissions at a cost of 1/5 or 1/10 of what it otherwise would have cost. He deregulated energy, and we're now enjoying the benefits of a deregulated energy structure and all the advantages that come with it. On a civil rights bill, he actually had the political courage to veto a badly written civil rights bill and then get a good one passed. He promoted and passed the Americans with Disabilities Act. He took the farm program, which was all subsidies, and converted some of the subsidies into incentives for exports. We can go on. Crime bill.
See, this is what happens when you have a chief of staff. You know every bill that passed or didn't, and it's probably encyclopedically filed
But
somewhere.
the point is, it was dramatic, strong, and important legislation.
You say something. You say he had a strong moral and cultural sense. When was that most in evidence from your perspective?
Well, there were a lot of tough issues that came. I think it would be of interest to your viewers to know that on almost 24 occasions, we had to invoke either an actual veto or a threat of a veto over the life issue. And George Bush stood for life as firmly as any president has. When he had to make the decision to send young men and women into harm's way in the Gulf War, I could see in the president the personal anguish, and just before he did it, he actually had a phone conversation with the Episcopalian bishop who disagreed with him, but they prayed on the phone for the president to make the right choice.
Wow. You say he was a deft diplomat, and that you make reference here with the relationship with Mitterrand and France was not in the best shape coming out of the Reagan administration, and yet you say Bush healed it. How so?
Francois Mitterrand and Ronald Reagan had gotten into a personality conflict. I think that's the easiest way to express it. On policy, of course, but they just didn't mesh. The president wanted to take advantage of the opportunity of perhaps getting the Soviets out of Eastern Europe and helping reunify Europe. He needed a cohesive NATO. France, Germany, United Kingdom, those are the three key allies he had to bring together. Mitterrand was a key to it all. And so the president invited Francois Mitterrand to Kennebunkport. And there was George Bush at his Mitterrand comes dressed to the nines. George Bush is as informal as possible. It looked to me and Scowcroft like this was going to be a difficult situation. But the president deferred to Francois Mitterrand. He had been president longer, and so he asked him for his advice. He sat and listened to his suggestions. And Mitterrand was a great viewer of history with the big picture. And over hours of discussion, by the time they finished in 2 days, they were as close and focused on what the president wanted to do in Europe.
You have been slightly criticized, and not so slightly,
Just slightly?
in other places about what you've written in this book, when you say George Bush and Francois Mitterrand were world-class leaders. Was Ronald Reagan not a world-class leader?
But he was. But the last 2 years in the Reagan administration really ended up with a couple of little problems like this as the president began to have trouble with Congress and as Iran-Contra caused some difficulties. And Mitterrand came with a view that was not in coincidence with what Ronald Reagan wanted at the time.
Did they get along, George Bush and Ronald Reagan? Because ideologically, at least when they were contending for the nomination earlier, before Ronald Reagan was elected, there was tension. These men were occupying two wings of the party.
But they weren't. They were both conservatives. George Bush was as conservative as Ronald Reagan on the fundamental issues of freedom, free enterprise, not liking taxes, wanting to cut spending, smaller government, incentives for the family to get the benefits rather than institutions. They were in sync on that.
Go ahead.
But they did get along extremely well. After Ronald Reagan offered George Bush the nomination as vice president, all the bygones, if you will, of the political campaign, as smart politicians usually do, were forgotten, and they were a team, a true team.
Was the read my lips, no new taxes pledge a bridge too far a mistake?
In retrospect, of course it was. I'm not sure everybody recognized it as such at that time. I wasn't part of the writing of the speech, but as a governor who has to accept legislation with increases in fees and adjustments to taxes, I did cringe a little bit when I heard it, and I had hoped that somehow they could have put a little bit of a rounder shape on it rather than those sharp edges. But he tried to fulfill that commitment. The first budget, the first-year budget, we were able to get it without taxes. But then Foley and Mitchell, Tom Foley running the House, George Mitchell leading the Senate, they were determined to make him pay the ransom, and for the good of the country, he saw he had to.
You mentioned here the lighter side of George Bush, which we don't hear a lot about. There's some great anecdotes. One, he's bored at one of these European meetings, and you've got the German chancellor up front who apparently was having a love affair with desserts and couldn't stop. And the president, George H.W. Bush, is writing little limericks. What were they, and how did you get to see them?
Well, he would write these bawdy limericks, and Scowcroft and I were sitting behind, and he would fold it as if it was a missive of significant importance and hand it to us. And Scowcroft and I would have to read these with a straight face and nod. And, but I can tell you, as a good chief of staff, I kept none.
You kept none of them, but you do have you remember the ends of a few of these, which you mention here. Something about and her husband Dennis couldn't catch up with her.
Yeah, and even her husband Dennis couldn't catch her.
A reference to Lady Thatcher.
Right.
We'll leave it there, and you can imagine the other limericks.
Yeah.
They are interesting and fun. I want to move on to Iraq for a minute. The president, George H.W. Bush, and Brent Scowcroft made a very wise calculation.
And Jimmy Baker.
And James Baker, of course. That they would go into Kuwait, remove Saddam Hussein and his forces from Kuwait, but not march into Baghdad.
For two reasons.
Why?
Number one, the president had built a coalition, including Arab countries, who were a very active part of that and had gone to the UN and gotten resolutions on what he said we wanted to do and what he indicated to them we wouldn't do. And the resolutions had a line drawn, and it was not to occupy Baghdad. And secondly, the president, the reason he accepted that is he knew that an occupation force in the Middle East would be in quicksand up to their eyeballs.
He and Scowcroft wrote in their own book in 1998, had we gone the invasion route, the U.S. could conceivably still be an occupying power in a bitterly hostile land. How
Very prophetic.
Yeah.
Very prophetic.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Now, given all of that, what do you make of George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq and where we are today?
You have to give it the right context. Post 9/11, the United States is recovering from the worst attack on the United States in history. The president is responsible for the safety of this country.
But bin Laden was in Afghanistan. He wasn't in Iraq.
But there were all kinds of people all over the place. Now, I don't know the intelligence he had, but all the intelligence agencies were in concert. The French, the British, the Germans, the Israelis, the U.S., and the Saudis.
Here's my question. Would George H.W. Bush have sent those troops in?
It depends what the intelligence actually was. If the intelligence says you should go in, he would have. And if the intelligence wasn't strong enough to go in, he wouldn't have. That's the only right answer to that hypothetical
But remember,
question.
but it's not hypothetical. Scowcroft and Baker were against the invasion of Iraq and wrote op-eds to that effect because of their sense of history, which I think the President George H.W. Bush profoundly understood.
But even Brent,
the Middle East.
But even Brent and Jimmy didn't have all the intelligence that the president had at that time. I understand them making those recommendations. I saw the op-eds, but I always recognize that a president has to make the last decision. He has to concern himself with the safety of the country, and I understand how hard it is when you're seeing every I and dotted and T crossed in the intelligence reports.
Will that decision, you think, hurt Jeb Bush's run for the presidency?
I think any candidate has to run on their own. Now, you carry both the benefit and the burden of your heritage.
Right.
The power of breeding stock, I call it. And I think he's going to have to figure out how to deal so that he maximizes the benefit and minimizes the negative.
Yeah, no,
that's an art form.
Yeah, no, well, it is, and one that takes some getting used to, I imagine. What do you make of the rise of ISIS? And do you think that the United States in some way created not ISIS, but the circumstances into which ISIS could be born?
Leaving the Iraqis without the support of 10, 15,000 American troops was a huge mistake. And the withdrawal of those troops from there created a power vacuum, not just in military might, but a political power vacuum. And when there is a vacuum, mischief takes place. And you're dealing in a country where every ministry is treated as an ATM machine. and so the fact is that leaving that vacuum allowed mischief to take place and allowed ISIS as one component of that mischief to begin to grow and thrive.
I want to move to the Pope. You've no doubt been watching what he's been saying. Give me your take on the Pope and his involvement in the temporal sphere. You see what he's done in Cuba, forging this rapprochement between the United States and the Castro regime. Is that a good movement forward, or are you concerned about it?
Look, on faith and morals, he's my Pope, he's your Pope. On politics and science, he's not. And I think he ought to stay out of it. But that's my personal opinion.
Are you worried about this environmental encyclical?
I'm worried about a number of things. The environmental encyclical, in my opinion, is a huge mistake. It's based on, in my opinion, faulty science. And I think the Pope has been sold a bill of goods. But to try and somehow imply a credibility to a position that is unproven is, in my opinion, a mistake. The Church made a mistake with Galileo, and I hope he doesn't make the same kind of a mistake here.
Okay, let's get back to terra firma and more comfortable topics. Looking at this Republican field, who could you see yourself supporting? Who do you think best reflects the vision and the sensibility that George H.W. Bush brought to the office?
I have too many friends in this game to try and pick out one or the other. There's a handful and they're the top tier. Everybody knows who they are. I really do have a partiality, however, to governors and former governors. I really think the mess that the country is in right now needs someone who has managed a legislature as a chief executive and dealt with creating legislation and laws, who has been able to harness, if you will, the tendency of a bureaucracy to grow, and has been able to deal and live amongst his constituents the way a governor does. And so I lean towards governor and former governors, and there's a handful of them running that I think any one of which would be a good president.
What are the qualities that George H.W. Bush brought to office that you think some of these, particularly the top tier, could benefit from? What are they missing?
I think the most important thing that George Bush brought to office was character, self-discipline, modesty, and a willingness to listen to people. One of the great things in the White House we had is he had good people there. We mentioned Jimmy Baker, Brent Scowcroft, Roger Porter, Dick Darman on domestic policy, Boyd and Gray. He would bring us in on issues and ask us to talk to him about the issue. And you could say whatever you wanted to this president. You could argue with him as hard as you wanted on one side of a position or another. And he would then draw a decision, and the team was solid enough that you would then go out and march to the president's tune.
The Quiet Man, The Indispensable Presidency of George H.W. Bush, is available at bookstores everywhere and online. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. You can also sign up for my free e-blast there and get more info on the Will Wilder book series. Until next time, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.